the exile's path. To exist and not perish, to have life, to fight, to be saved. That was the primal scream of a Slovak heart, a cry that clawed its way out of his throat when the plunderers came to ravage, to torture, to kill. There was no decision to be made, only one direction possible. He dismissed the Hamletian dilemma, the paralyzing question of to be or not to be, with utter contempt, scornful of its very presence, for to his nation that question sounded like an abomination. What not to be? To be, only to be, even at the cost of life and death, never to cease existing, so long as the blood of Slovakia flowed within them. That was the final battle, a lightning strike, a clarion call, a command born of the inescapable final hour. There could be no room for the weak. He who hesitated wove the lash for his own back. He who abandoned the ranks of this desperate army, from which no one dared defect, prepared for himself a suffering without end. It was 5 minutes to midnight. There he stood, and there he stands even today. Hell was already disgorging its legions of fiends upon them. The choking blackness of its smoke suffocated his lungs. Its stench rolled and sighed them down, but they would not falter. The battle itself was their witness. Any foe who sought to overcome them would have to fight with ferocious intensity. The war for their existence would be a long one. He stood his ground, leaning his chest against the armor of that monstrous abomination, determined not to let it advance a single inch, for every step forward it took shortened the life of his people. He would not move, even if they drove him back. He would remain in his place, a rallying cry to battle. He would become an idea, a bulwark of Slovak blood. He would hack his way through the dragon and its servants, whose end would be the abyss of the damned. To exist and not perish, he shouted at the top of his voice, as the sulphur of hell poured over them, and the breath of the devil's maw roared, a black squall, a subterranean gale. The blight of desolation surged through their lines. The barbarian invasion destroyed, burned, and plundered everything in its path. The Moloch devoured victims, both guilty and innocent. The furies vomited forth from Lucifer's realm raged in the air and on the ground. The horizon became a black execution block. Where did this crater of pitch and stench originate? Who unleashed the apocalyptic beast of ruin upon them? A slant-eyed villain, possessed by a devilish urge, sought to penetrate even to the tabernacles of God. He did not hesitate to arrive without a mask. Naked and black, he allowed himself to be dragged on a chain, striking down all that hinted at either divine or human dignity, demolishing respect for all values on earth and in heaven, trampling on honor and virtue. He stole love from the people, plundered and robbed every last crumb, yet demanded to be called a liberator. His presence was confirmed by mounds of filth. Where was he not seen? Which path did not stink of his excrement? In which house did he not leave his refuse? On which pasture did the rot of his carrion not reek? He spread through acts of banditry, defiling everything. He stained families, street, and squares, violated the blood of virgins, women, children, the elderly, and animals. He looted, took, and massacred in villages and cities. He murdered and dragged away throngs of people like cattle into the kingdom of cruelty, and did not pause even for the cries of infants at their mothers' breasts. Only lamentation remained, and the bitter taste of tears. From the region beneath the Tatras, where life had been vibrant moments before, there rose the aching moan of a scattered and ruined people. Those who had the strength to curse the hell-wrought fiends did so with all their breath. Those who knew how to pray clasped their hands before God and pleaded for salvation. Those incapable of either in their sheer despair called upon death itself. A cold grave opened at the feet of anyone who dared to stop moving. Even the natural world was not spared the terror. The sun grew weary of shining upon a land choked by clouds and smoke. For days on end it failed to break through the layers of soot and stench that billowed from the valleys and mountains of Slovakia. From the ravaged villages and fields came the desolate sounds of roaming animals, creatures lost, and searching for homes that no longer existed. In the orchards, the charred stumps of linden and apple trees jutted toward the sky like the skeletal arms of the dead, raised in a massive, silent accusation. The ruins of walls, pits, and wreckage, spattered with fresh red blood, screamed toward the darkening firmament as if calling for a day of wrath and judgment. Corpses lay scattered on the streets. They had no relatives left to mourn them, no priest to offer final rites, and no funeral to grant them rest. Only flocks of ravens, cawing amidst the burnt-out shells, circled the fallen and the carrion, eager for their terrible harvest. Swarms of great bloated flies emerged, drawn by the foul odor of decomposition, a stench that polluted the air and threatened to infect the very earth. This was the totality of their plight. This was what came with the destruction of Slovakia. There was nothing left to await, nothing left to hope for. The work of Satan was complete, and his arrival had horrified their souls into silence. It was the year of our Lord 1945, the war now over, when the pride of Slovakia lay crushed in the dust. The state beneath the Tatras was left plundered, a wilderness. Nothing lived here any more, neither on the land nor in the air, nor upon the waters of the Slovak rivers was there a trace of the life that had been. Everything had vanished as after a mass extinction. What was there left to behold? God was in the heavens, Satan held the earth, and Slovakia simply was no more.
Bratislava had fallen.
Oh, dearest mother! The capital of their independence, the pulsing artery of the Slovak spirit, the very pride of their existence, the poetic heartland, had died before their eyes and would not rise again. Bratislava, so recently resurrected after 1,000 years, lay again lifeless at their feet. What was there to do? Where could one go? The sons of hell swooped down on the narrator like vultures on a corpse, and there was no one to cry out to for rescue. Slovakia was a country stripped of law, a land that protected no one. This ground of lawlessness, ruled by a dregs of outcasts, murderers, and heretics, had become unbearably confined and dark, a living prison.
The insects crawled upon his skin.
There were moments when he regretted not having fallen on the distant fronts of the world. He remembered his survival, why he had not perished 3 times when shelled by aircraft in Ukraine, why the mortars and grenades had struck near him, sparing his life. Why had he been made to return? Why was he forced to witness the cruel unfolding drama of Slovakia's annihilation? Was it for this that he had saved his life? No. Better not to think, not to reflect, to see nothing at all. He needed to grasp hold of something, anything, that might kill the thoughts ravaging his mind. And so he did. He took a spade and a hoe and went to work. Physical labor brought a temporary easing of his nerves. For 3 weeks, from dawn until deep into the night, he rescued himself by digging his garden. It brought him peace, and at times even a flicker of pleasure to be rid of consciousness, of sight, of feeling, of everything that reminded him of the Slovak ruin. He drove himself into the labor to slaughter the spiritual agony he could no longer bear. He wished he had 3 times as much soil to turn, just to prolong the oblivion as long as possible.
But the work ended. He finished the task and retreated into solitude.
Yet solitude, too, began to kill him. His room became a jail. The books of the poets he daily took into his hands offered no comfort. The walls seemed poised to collapse upon him. The entire world, with all its horrors, had pinned him down. Unable to endure it, he ran outside. The streets of Bratislava, a sight of utter horror. Nothing remained of the city's beauty. The narrator stumbled over shattered beams, the rubble of walls, splintered pavement, and pockmarked asphalt. He snagged on electrical and telephone wires, torn and strewn across the ground, and the streets were choked with the junk and detritus of looted shops and homes.
There was no traffic, no hustle of pedestrians.
The avenues reeked of the barbarians. Ragged, filthy Asians had overrun the city. On Vaznorska Street, one of them stood in his path and dragged him into a ruined building, forcing him to dig out buried corpses. Another, near the Metropole Cinema, chased him into a cellar to haul out crates from an abandoned military depot. He longed to flee whenever he encountered the Soldateska, a military mob that stank of alcohol, debauchery, and blasphemy. They were all spawned of the devil's nest. Drunkards swarmed their fallen metropolis. In 2 hours of walking, he did not meet a single familiar face. He craved clean air. He ran toward a Kachada, toward the woods. He passed through the vineyards, which were now masterless. Everything was churned up, the front line had passed right through. The fruits of their soil would not be harvested this year. How desolate it felt. He did not see a single bird, The surrounding darkness had driven them from the forest. He sought the rustle of the mountain, hoping to be charmed by the scent of resin, pine needles, and moss. He was disappointed. The Slovak mountains had never wailed like this before. All of nature was weeping. When he sat down by the side of the path, an infinite heaviness settled upon him. There was no sun in the air, the grasses held no green, the moss offered no warmth.
He stared silently down.
The view of Bratislava in the valley was like looking into a grave. Here you lie, my Slovakia, land of beauty, soil of poetry, our dearest mother. Her sons could shriek in sorrow, if only they dared. But who cared about them now? Down there, a nation was dying. He sat there beside the martyred land of Slovakia. Hours, long hours, its agony seeped into his soul. He was dying a death that a man should never have to face. The narrator, consumed by his grief, silently challenged a man of sorrow. Did a suffering Job truly lose more? Job lost sons, daughters, possessions, health, but he, the narrator, had lost his very homeland. He saw himself lying abandoned on a heap of rubble, wretched, listless, and desperate. No, not quite desperate.
His hands still trembled in the air. He still had the will to pray.
He pictured himself on the street, standing on a stone corner, holding out his chilled hand, silently begging passers-by for comfort and understanding. Who would command his eyes to open and receive the light? Who would speak to his heart, saying, "Pour out your sorrow into these palms"? He realized his hand was outstretched and waiting for a divine ray. It was the hand of Christ, bearing the invisible stigmata of pain, the wounded palm of the Son of God, extended throughout the ages wherever a miserable wretch stood, trembling and begging for mercy. That wretch's name was one of his least. It could no longer hurt him that he had lost friends, brothers, and acquaintances. In the end, he had lost everything. All that remained were his hands, stretched toward the heavens. He did not know at what hour of his suffering he stood, facing the sacrifice of these hands, which were already withering and would soon droop once he looked upon them. For he prayed, "Lift me up, Lord, and if you will not lift me, at least allow these two hands of mine to be lifted, like burning candles, that they may illuminate your eternal sun." And in a moment of existential rapture, he pleaded, "Lord, do not let me return from this hour where only you remain for me. Do not let my heart be shattered for all that I have lost. I refuse to look back into the valley of ruin." A bitter question then escaped him. What good was it to know he was bound to a globe that wept, haunted, threatened, robbed men and nations of life, announced wars, murders, injustices, and servitude, and raids in its own depravity? If he deserved worse, then God, you gave, and you have taken away. Bypass Job from afar and leave him in silent suffering. Take even all that you have already taken. Job never complained. He averted his gaze, unwilling to see the desolation of the beautiful land, the ruins in the fields and gardens, the absence of rustling barley and whispering pastures.
Suffer so that you see nothing.
Flee the horror of destruction, lest its deadness and endless murder consume you. This was the fear that whispered within him. The voice was a monotone, speaking of world destruction, of darkness, never of the sun. The sun? Nothing of it remained. But to walk without the sun, this was a road none of them had known. It was a path never taken before, newly carved, and it bore a cursed name, Exile. Exile. A terrifying reality. It was impossible to imagine a child torn from its mother's breast, thrown onto a dung heap, without people hacking at each other, without the place being sprayed with blood. The fate of such a child would drive a mother or father mad. They would kill for their infant. Yet, for an exile, no one would go to kill. Not even the exile himself. Exile strips a man of his bloodlust and reduces him to a helpless child. The reach of exile was immeasurable. Its power could not be measured. What was the strength of human will against this force? What was the value of human dignity against the laws of banishment? What could the pride of a learned man prove against this utter humiliation? The twilight of those who fled in fear, nameless and alone, was boundless. O Job, my namesake, who calls you master, official, counselor, or by any civil title of your beautiful land now?
No one.
His status was that of a pauper. He could look back, but better not to. He could stop, but he dared not halt his steps. He could beg for tears, but they would not come. And he might wish to curse or seek revenge, but he must not pursue that relief. Exile was a force that conquered both curse and vengeance. He wanted to hate his fate, but Job must endure his dung heap.
To whom could he turn? To the friends he once had?
My poor Job, the narrator mused in the silence of his mind, where your friends are, there is a world of suffering. Do not look to them. With whom could he share his sorrow when his friends had gone blind, deaf, and mute to his plight? From birth to the grave he had suffered, and they had not come. He cried out with the sorrowful Job, let friends abandon him. Let this miserable earth abandon him? His appearance was that of ruin. His eyes, which had once seen the beauty of this cradle land, bore unhealed wounds. Everything was lost. He could curse those who had nurtured him into life, and he could curse his own existence. He saw only his terror, and the terror of the earth, and unbearable colors splashed across his vision. He had once been a poet, singing for the cosmos, for the flowers, and for lovers. He had chased a vision like a butterfly, believing himself to be a child of azure worlds. Now they must abandon him. Let them forsake the lunatic who, in sheer audacity, had believed he was not born of the earth, but spewed forth from the abysses of heaven, mistakenly claiming the stars as his origin. They were not the stars. It was merely a discordant sojourn on earth. It was eternal restlessness. Forsake the wanderer, he thought. Do not speak of the Slovak soil having a poet urchin. Do not return to his past. He does not belong there. He belongs to the exiles and will never find his peace. Slovakia, farewell. Then he lowered his eyes and began to move. He fled everything as though he were half naked. He tried to take a step but realized he needed something for his hand. And into his hand came the object that became his fateful sign, the beggar's staff. The beggar's staff. Could he have imagined in his early youth that it belonged only in the hands of a fairy tale hero? Or perhaps only to the one mocked for being reduced to the beggar's staff? When could he have suspected that one day he too would have to seize it? It had been the symbolic mark of the poor, but he was infinitely more than poor. He grasped it, convinced he had nothing and would never have anything again. Never again. This was not mere poverty. This was destitution, worse. He could only perish. To perish of destitution, that was his destination.
Departures, mournful departures.
He was forced to venture across mountains and valleys without certainty, without hope. He had no plans, no goal.
Where to go?
A fierce, vital desperation seized him. To get somewhere, away, far away, where he could breathe even a little. He would chase the fanatic thought that he might reach a place, that he might see new azure skies. To find a scrap of land, to have some corner in the world, even a corner reserved only for pain and tears, that was the thought of salvation. It was not easy. He paid an immensely steep ransom for his escape. With every step, a soul sickness, a raw grief, was added to his burden. With every breath, his vision blurred, his head drooped, and his arms hung heavy. His backpack was impossibly heavy. To cram his entire life into it and carry it, that was beyond his strength. The world spun around him. There were moments when his nerves and pores roared as in a chasm where the howling of mad beasts descended. And there were moments when his eyes went still in silence like a stagnant pool from pain and from hunger. If he had gone into a stranger's orchard to pluck a single pear and the owner had caught him, he would have had to say that he possessed nothing in the world but that pear. For a man dying of starvation, there is no private property, and if he had crept under a man's roof for rest and sleep, he would have told him, "This house is also mine, for I am dying of exhaustion." But he had to remain on his feet, not collapse to endure. These were torments, terrible torments, to be home among strangers, to share a house with vermin, brigands and abusers, to do the bidding of bandits, to obey a random international rabble. The narrator began to walk higher, up toward Devon, toward Lummock, toward the Danube, where the grief finally broke and tears overwhelmed him. He wanted to avoid the dens of the rogues, the lairs of the new masters. Yet the true suffering was the thought that he would meet none of his own people again. Who would close his eyes when he perished here? Who would cover him with earth? At times it seemed he had reached the end of the road. But where does a wretched life find its finish? Dying, he knew, was not a redemption from misery. Now he remembered his lost ability to pray. "Mother, where are you?" The silent cry was wrenching. "Mother, teach me to pray again." No, he had not forgotten the words. But the sweet prayers she had taught him in childhood were useless now. He knew he was meant to pray the beggar's prayer, and that his mother had never taught him. She had never suspected that her dear child would become an exile, forced to wander the world without knowing the exile one's plea. "Oh, Mother, return to me from the grave, embrace me again, and teach me, for my heart is barren of prayer." He then dropped to his knees in the dust and keened, a sound like the shattered crown of a great tree split open by a gale. Could this raw agony not be a form of prayer? He reasoned that blasphemy was impossible when one was focused on God, when one sought him, when one desired him with such fierce intensity. "My dear Job," he wondered, "did you, too, learn in your youth to pray as a beggar prays? Did not your humiliation, your sores, whisper the most fervent prayer? Did you not pray with your unbearable sorrow?" The stone may not have moved at Job's despair, but he had forgiven the earth for having spawned him, raised him, and finally crushed him. 3 months of hell had passed when, by the banks of the Danube, the narrator uttered his final conscious wail of despair. He saw the end of his self-imposed, desperate vigil. He formed the last thought, a silent verse of farewell, for the ravaged land he was now physically abandoning. "In tears upon the Danube shore, with scalding sorrow, I will sever, my dearest mournful land, no more to hold you close. Farewell forever." He closed his eyes, sealing the memory of the mournful riverbank. He had severed the last thin tie. The path of exile was now his only road. It was late, deep night, when a mysterious man, like a shadow with a backpack, moved away from the Czech border, seeking a way out of the darkness, out of the atrocities. He had nothing ahead of him. He did not know how he walked. He moved by the mercy of God alone. The heavens were overcast, and nothing stirred on the earth. The narrator felt in that moment that everything was conspired against the land that had rolled far from God's hands, a land that seemed destined to remain dead forever. He lifted his tear-stained eyes to the sky. He knew that beyond the wretched earth, the stars and the sun, the lights that brought peace to the soul, were hidden in the heavens. Now they were concealed, death had claimed everything, and he felt as though he were walking away from a massive funeral. All that remained was a grieving cosmos, depopulated, empty, and devoid of human life. Then came the morning, and with it bright, azure July days. At first, he thought he was miraculously saved for them, but as he looked down at the earth and at life, he understood that they were not worthy of miracles. It was too great a burden for their eyes to behold a miracle. He realized they should not demand miracles from God. On the contrary, they should thank Providence if they were simply allowed to suffer. This was the message he felt compelled to share with the souls of this terrible age. For their path ahead would be a long chain of impassable peaks and abysses, a pilgrimage through forests and waters, through gunpowder smoke, through the torments of hunger and thirst, through fevers, disease, and danger, through underground shelters and the world's peripheries, and they would be trailed by packs of murderers and villains lying in wait for their scent. Any outcast of the world could now reach out and take his life at any moment, with impunity and a clear conscience. For the emigrants of his kind, there was no certainty or safety left on earth. They had been branded as war criminals so that they could be further hunted and killed simply because they had loved their homeland. Slovakia was not to be Slovakia anymore, and they were to be exterminated. They would be seized, dragged away, tormented, and murdered. He saw this the instant he crossed the border. The spirit of murder hovered over the land that death was claiming. They were betrayed even by those to whom they fled. "They will pay a bottle of liquor for one of us," he thought bitterly. "We are worth no more than that." These were the azure July mornings in which he woke with dread, the question trembling on his lips, what happens today? They knew about every one of them. They knew about him. He was in their records. He had passed through too many registrations. They could easily find him. One day, he stopped on the slope of the Bavarian mountains and asked himself, helpless, what should be done? For a frightening moment, he wanted to weep uncontrollably, like a child with a mother. Before him stood the wide, boundless foreign land. To plunge into it, as into the endless waters of the sea, was the only thing left. My God, he thought, if only one could plunge into this sea just once and drown, perhaps there would be no more pain in the world for me. But here, one had to plunge in anew every day, every hour, every moment, with the same exhaustive strength. He had to gather his last reserves and simply wrestle for survival, wrestle until the agony, the final, fatal agony, was upon him. What was left for him? Only what remained for a man drowning in the water, to find himself in the shadow of death and fight his way toward rescue. He could not scream for help. There was no one to bring him aid in the hope of soon having solid ground beneath his feet. There was no land left for him to stand upon. There was no way back, no place where he could stop with the certainty of having found his ground. He had no choice but to grasp for salvation.
Salvation.
The word salvation roared in his head, a curse, a warning, a desperate plea. He knew there was no going back. What then was meant to save him? He would wander the world. He would perish of sorrow. What was meant to save him? Flight itself was no rescue. He was running, but where was the goal of his escape? Where did he run to be saved? Yet, with a primal, penetrating power, the single word salvation gripped him and hammered in his mind. He spoke it with every movement, every nerve, every pore. He yearned to possess something. He chased after some phantom with a fierce, elemental drive, reaching for even a blade of grass like a drowning man. Then an unconquerable desire flared within him to become a man once more, to be a creature, to find a place where divine, human, and natural rights would grant him sanctuary. And although he knew such a corner did not exist in the world, he was determined to fight for it until exhaustion claimed him. He chased the phantom blindly, falling, writhing like one severely ill. He raved, incoherently shouting at everything that moved around him, desperate that they should not take the corner of the world he had found. He had seen it in his fevered state. He had created it. It had to be his. Perhaps it was at times a wish to die, at times a wish to be someone else, to find himself elsewhere, in other worlds and another life. A convulsive urge then seized him to break through this enigma of salvation. An unstoppable fanaticism ignited, tearing him toward madness, to believe even when faith was gone, to hope even against hopelessness. To win in the face of defeat, what was this? Was it merely fear? A primal sense of dread? A subconscious desire for self-preservation?
No, it was more.
It was the endurance of life. It was a message of freedom. It was a gospel of the spirit, a gospel uncrushed by the loss of home, unbound by exile, but a penetrating fire from the darkness to the surface. It was a spark, a creative ray of God continuing the work of the Almighty on earth. Yet this was only a momentary flash into the future. Face up, he told himself. For there would be moments when this divine ray would cool, cease to warm, vanish, and refuse to shine. Golgotha would become Golgotha, a hill of bleeding, the home of death. This world would be the shriek of the sick. This place would be the curse of the thief, and the plea of the thief. And through the midst of this very place, Jesus Christ would pass 1,000 times again. "Why did you leave us, Golgotha?" they would cry after him, whenever they saw him depart for the heavenly paradise. "Why did you tell us to suffer when we do not know how? Why did you give us Slovak blood when you took Slovakia from us?" And yet they would still watch him go, hope infused with despair. Yes, this divine ray would plead, "Do not weep." It would command, "Arise." But immediately following, there would be minutes when he would hear the word "do not weep," only so that he might weep even more and not open his eyes into the void, because he would see nothing, and the call to arise would reach him again, only to ensure he remained fallen.
He would have nowhere to go but the place where he had collapsed.
He would merely watch his shadow stretch itself out over Golgotha. His hands, yellow and skeletal, stretched toward the heavens, would sometimes be stained by the blood of his pain. But he must not flinch, not for the mockery that would rain down from the pack of Satan's wolves below the cross.
Hope and fight for your ray.
This command echoed in his soul as he looked around, searching for the kindred spirits of this gospel of the Spirit. Who would answer him? The narrator thought then of the others, the people of the same devastating fate. Hundreds, thousands, millions of his kind surrounded him, their gaze fixed intently on his eyes. Shattered, hollowed out, drawn faces of all nations, tribes, and races, scattered by God in this diaspora, across zones and continents, surged forward in dangerous masses, threatening to darken the day.
Where was God sending them? To him?
He was no Joshua to prolong the march of the sun across the sky while the battle for their homeland was fought. He was no Moses to strike the depths of the sea with a rod, parting the waters to provide them with dry ground to reach the opposite shore. What did they see in him? He was one of them, a solitary invalid among millions of the infirm. He was a ruin, just like all of them. The mute, desiccated faces of his fellow sufferers offered themselves to him, just as his own face offered itself to the heavens. But the heavens, too, were mute, without response, without a tremor. A terrible silence enclosed them. Even where they stopped to rest, a deathly stillness entered them. The horizons were cramped, the very air tightened in their chests and throats. Then the thought struck him. The world would become larger if they simply broke this unbearable silence. They had to take action. "Let us unite," cried a million eyes, determined to live even as they were nailed to the cross. "Do not let us perish," screamed the eyes of men, women, and children, all for whom bearing the silence was harder than facing death itself. How could they shatter this deafness? With pain? That would only magnify it. What could ruins undertake? How could the sick unite? He lay somewhere in the dust by the road and frantically clapped his hands, beginning to cry out to God. But the mute faces around him only grew quieter. What? Had they still not reached the peak of their necessity? Did they wish to know themselves only in a greater tragedy? Were they not yet ripe for prayer? Were they not yet upon the hill of union with God? Was this not the hour of the final test? Had they not been purified by all the fire and blood? Was this not the day of horror? In that moment he remembered Christ when his earthly kingdom of God dissolved in the hour of agony, and dominion was stripped from him. He had no one. No one went to fight for his realm. In that abandonment, all that remained for him was prayer. The 3-hour agony must have seemed an eternity. Surely he sought the words for prayer. And yet, O Messiah of the world, could one reproach him that during the entirety of his suspension on the cross, he managed to utter only 7 words of prayer, and the faces of his companions were distant, silent, waxen like candles? All that remained before Christ's eyes was the vast, sweeping plain of the world. The only question left, the root of his bitterness and heavy fate, was the only thing on his lips. Who am I? He was now the son of no one. His life plowed a furrow like a rattling chain, hanging from the neck of a slave, dragged toward the guillotine. From which mountains had he come? In his youth he had paused 100 times before the terrible sight of the eagles, yielding to their mastery of the air. He had affirmed the dominance of the fish and dolphins in the oceans. The cicadas of the steppe and the flora of the tropics sang songs of contentment at his feet. And today he did not know from which desolate corner of the world his life now drifted. Where would his harbor be? He groped in the darkness. Everything was dead, a void without days or nights. He saw nothing, no direction, no face, no guiding hands. To suffer? For what? For sins? Then what was the use of forgiveness if hell endured? What was the use of remorse if the chasm between the heavens and a wretched human ruin remained unclosed? Where could he flee when there was no space where his life would not shimmer in its own darkness and horror? Then came the temptation of the devil. "Little Slovak," the evil spirit whispered, "deny your foolish racial pride. Come with me. I am the murky water. I am chaos. If you are with me, you will grab hold of something. The world today is anarchy. Outside this framework, you cannot survive. Refuse to obey any higher beings.
Avenge the shame, the fact that you are dust, nothing more."
For a man in despair, that would have been enough to believe the father of lies. He was truly nothing more than dust. He could believe he was lost, for he truly was lost. He could already imagine colliding with the archangel Michael in some ethereal space, for he had been cast out of heaven anyway. He snapped back to reality and cried out, "Jesus Christ, I am the son of no one. If you do not answer, this solitude will destroy me. Woe to me alone, the serpent is on the tree. Lord, you who once stained the cross with blood when Satan eclipsed the sun and there was no sun, look, my deviation ends. The dark night does not move a step. The sky is a graveyard." He remembered Christ's agony. Remember how you were hung on the timber of shame and cried out, "Elohim, Elohim." You were thirsty. You hissed, "I thirst." Remember how your face twisted from the vinegar and gall, and bitterness entered your very bone. "Lord, I am forsaken. I am thirsty. I will perish, and my sacrifice will redeem no one." You knew how to suffer. I do not know. You knew how to drive the devil away when he spoke during your 40 days of silence in the desert. Give me the strength to drive him away, too. He pleaded this way, howling for long hours right at the closed gates of heaven. They remained shut. Everything that followed was nothing but struggle, suffering, uncertainty, and stumbling. He gasped for breath, running exhausted to what he hoped was God's roof, only to find he could not remain there even long enough for a single Our Father. Everywhere he moved, the same curse, "I am lost." He clenched his fist, blood surged to his tongue, and he was ready to curse the world and blaspheme against anyone who crossed his path. Why was he needed? Why did the earth carry him on its surface? To wait day after day for the kind of anxious hours he would die in tomorrow? To wake up every morning and fear the entire day how dangerous and fatal it would be? What good was his fight against phantoms? For he was not fighting for anything real, only for specters. But it pleased God to test him further. He found no rest. There was no place, no minute where he could sit in peace. He was persecuted by demons, chased from corner to corner, beaten like the lowest servant in hell. His agitation escalated into a kind of delirium. He threw himself at a wayside cross, holding the crucifix erected for the comfort of pilgrims. He tore a picture of the Mother of God from a prayer book and pressed it to his chest. "Maria, rescue me." It helped for a moment. Exhausted, he fell asleep, but immediately he woke with a start. The lash of his nerves drove him onward. He rose, wounded and alone. No Veronica came with cloth. No Simon of Cyrene appeared. He met no weeping Mary or comforting women. Not a living soul was near. Everyone had abandoned him. The entire world had forsaken him. The devil possessed every means to destroy him. First, he attempted to starve him. "Look," the evil one boomed, "my world thrives on lies, usury, extortion, and profiteering. Much can be gained from human misery. Setting up self-help and social aid at the expense of others. Everyone does that today. I can save you from starvation." The devil then unleashed the shadows of these horrors to growl behind him like beaten dogs. My God, he thought, what would it help anyone to be espoused to Franciscan poverty if one lived by bread alone and not by the word of God? What good would the monastery walls be, where he might be fed peas and beans, if his soul, suffering and thirsting for justice, was not sustained? He remembered the friars, the monks, the hermits. How many saints had lived, embracing voluntary poverty, conquering the world with it? More, they had tortured themselves to death through fasting. Where are you, saints? Help me. I can do nothing alone. He had never been alone before. Now he was. Angels, saints, blessed ones, martyrs, they were all silent. Everything was silent. Every silence was terrifying, dangerous, and cursed for him. He dared speak only with scorpions and insects. His voice was a roar, pouring from craters and subterranean holes, like the distant bellowing of beasts being suffocated by the lava and smoke of a prairie fire. His words no longer possessed human color or human cadence. His keening was the howling of the Melusina, the ghostly shriek of winds above a hanged man, a whirlwind of devils who had erupted from the gullet of hell, engaging in orgies and reveling in their demonic freedom. He was surrounded by a wall of silence, and above all, an impenetrable, accursed darkness relentlessly squeezed his soul. This darkness rolled over his eyes, gripped him with terrifying blows, roared into his wounds, touching him wherever he was sore. But that was not all. The devil pursued him further, filling his soul with defiance and lovelessness, for he knew that the forsaken are loved by no one. The devil prodded him toward indifference, dullness, and apathy, just to prevent him from rousing back to life. "I care for your every step," the voice mocked. "Do not stray. Go only where I tell you to go, and I will save you."
I am not love. Love is no weapon today. I am eternal defiance.
Oh, my God!
My God! What devastation! What helplessness! What annihilation of everything that still wished to be born and lived before his face! Did the Lord see the cunning and treacherous assaults of the devil? He thrashed like trash in the corners, dragged through the dust of the earth by this accursed beast of hell, knowing the easiest way to trap a pauper was through blasphemy. The devil knew that if the narrator lost all honor, he would need nothing. A corrupt man, when he has nothing left, wants to have neither God nor anything else. "I call upon you, Lord," he cried out so desperately that were it not for a mysterious ray occasionally escaping his hands for him, he would have choked on his own voice. "God, how immense is the flash of the moment, the fraction of a second, when my heart trembles knowing you are here, here beside me, here in my cry. Seek me, Lord, or I shall be no more."
The devil, too, had access to that last thought. He spoke with emphasis. The narrator would soon be no more. And he added, "You are not a man, and you'll be one no longer. Your name is Nobody. You will see and meet millions of people, and there will be the same nobody, the same emptiness in the world that you carry within yourself. It will be horrible to look at people and see no one.
It will be horrible to live where people live and yet have no one.
Those who rush by are seeking someone. They will meet someone. Who do you wish to meet? Who meets you? Who will open their eyes when you appear somewhere? No one will look with curiosity where you fix your gaze. At most you will see them shake the dust off their feet near you and move on. You will lose even language. You will speak only like a brute animal. You will lose even language. You will speak only like a brute animal. Do you want comfort from good people? Go to them. Find them.
I do not claim everyone is evil, but I claim that one is evil and the other will become evil.
My God, if it is true that everyone will be corrupted, guard your good and righteous ones, for even they will vanish. He prayed for Sodom and Gomorrah, hoping that even 10 righteous souls could be found. The fire from heaven could fall at any moment. Where would their place be? How were they to fight for humanity when humanity deemed them criminals? How were they to offer a saving hand when they could not reach them? The enemy is every man, he realized, a child of damnation, killing souls, allied with Satan. The day of Sodom was ripening. Yet one thought endlessly tormented him. What had he come to? He had escaped one hell only to find another. If he said he was a Slovak, he would be beaten. If he said he was merely an exile, he would be lost. Who remembers the lost?
And so he had nothing less and nothing more than one question. Who am I?
Who am I? He had believed in a just world, and the world was wicked. He had carried love to a place where they hated him. Who was he? A man with truth in his hand, if those who should shelter him embodied the lie. Who was he? A man, if the devil could stand before him and reach the finish line first.
Where do the roads lead me?
Dust fell beneath the arches of bridges, around power plants and hangars, and the airfields on the periphery of shattered cities, where the somber refugees, apatrides, and cast-offs of all nations wasted their days. As night approached, the exiles, bored and eternally mournful, shuffled back into the concentration camps, regularly, every evening, for every night. I stood in the line of apathetic men, gathered from around the world, the human debris the wars had aborted. None of us made any effort to disperse, though peace was supposed to be upon us. Who was still waiting for it? To do something? There was no choice at all. A person lay on the pavements like a discarded apple core. People were interested neither in the world, nor the future, nor prayer. We smoked cigarettes, drifted through the streets in an imaginary realm through long hours of life, unknowing, deafened. And the power that subjugated us was called the land of no one, a homeland without a master, or, worse yet, a common prostitute. There were no laws and no songs upon entering the house. No path led to the sun. Our hands hung slack, unable to reach the stars. A black market in human lives, which gave everyone time to stand around, opened its operation and named its terminals the Zone of the Dead. I watched the pantomime of this age. Only time could win this game. There was no other lottery to enter. There I stood in the dangerous gaming halls with the reckless gamblers, with the Huguenots and infantrymen, as the revolutions and wars of the world had spat them out. I declared myself one of them, an old rebel. I had lived with them on barricades, in barracks yards, in camps and revolts, then in idleness, desperation, and finally in sickness and fever. Forsaken, I rose from my hard cot and tried to make the sign of the cross. When I managed it, I took it as proof that I must be healthy. Afterward, I left. I spent long stretches leaving all this international rabble, only to return to it helpless, and then prepare yet again for endless departures. By this constant moving, I waste as much energy as a criminal being coached into sin or suicide, indefinitely postponing his death. I stood there, where all the world's gathered fragments had their terminal. I fed parasitically on their whims, wounded by blindness. We were all brothers there, jointly hunted, jointly despairing, jointly raving. And no one hurried to invent a new Bible for the new creation of the world. What for? I paused to reflect on myself and asked, from what kind of battle did I emerge? Whose image do I bear? Darkness is falling over this generation, I say. The final fermentation of the world is commencing. This age has split human life, like the sea separating two land masses, and empty darknesses reign again over the ends of the cosmos. Two shores loom blackly, bearing the terrible cargo of their armies. Satan and Michael the archangel have offered the world their aid, and the earth rumbled in its depths at their coming. God, who stirred up the storms of the seas over all creation, shook the earth, and opened the volcanoes of the water banks, now stands silently on the heights, looking down as if measuring the fever of a gravely ill planet. The earth is dying. The unleashed demons who recently churned the sea and land into dust left a haze of clouds behind, and from them jut out hands, some clenched, some praying, raised before God. The storms have swept away and drowned the seafarers, and a few of us, wrapped around a broken mast, await redemption. I am among them. Then listen to a life that will not be a pretty fairy tale. Listen to the history of a cripple. Listen to the truth from the mouth of one who spent his entire life in combat with both God and Lucifer. I will not begin with my childhood, for there was nothing there but sorrow. No sky of heaven shone on the days of my youth. My life was heavy, that was the sum of it. I threw it toward the azure several times, and each time it crashed back down to the ground. Defiance toward people rose up in me. Then came the scuffles, the blows, the kicks, and what good did it do me? Only that I became disgusted with everything. My arrival into the world happened the moment I was a ready-made desperado. Was that a sin? Mea culpa. Later, I will pass over it quickly. When I was a boy, a poet, a man, many perceived that I was savoring the street and its bacchanals, that I was flirting with Muhammad's paradise on earth, surrendering to the orgies of bohemianism, and confessing the heresy of modernism. All those who thought this made me bad. It was too easy for them. They were false prophets, liars, fraudsters, peddlers of my soul. They had cheap entertainment. A bad man was every good friend from whom worldliness and insistence screamed out. He brought with him clouds that he then left in my cell, and they settled with their full weight onto my open breviary. He spread the rumor that I was suffocating in the fog.
And the consequences? Terrible.
It was then that the earth swelled beneath the whip of war. The punishment of devastation destroyed millions like me and millions like my friends. That is why I was in the camp. But that is not the greatest punishment. In the camp, all sorts of weeds began to thrive. Collective idleness, mass laziness drove people into sin. It corrupted even those who had been only slightly bad. Respectable citizens devolved into degenerate, obscene monsters. They met like mass figures, drunkards, simpletons. It was easy for them to contact the loafers, scoundrels, ruffians, womanizers, and vagabonds who mastered the streets in the underworld, fighting each other for anything that held even a shred of shamelessness. They boasted shamelessly, speaking of how they sacrilegiously lay in wait for virgins and stole their purity, celebrating their numerous adulteries, their perverse lusts, their sadism, their devilish cravings for the sins of the flesh, and offering all the filth of their mouths as a rare spiritual nourishment. This pagan society, which cultivated its gods, a cult of hideousness, a cult of sin, was pursued by no authority, no police, nor was it even pursued by the cheap conscience of men. One entered its realm just as one entered the camp. No one knows how many of us perished in this paganism of the age. The return to God was difficult, never easy. This new religion offered a paradise of thoughtlessness and rejected self-denial, sacrifice, suffering, and abstinence. It commanded one to profit from life's misery, to live without struggle or toil. Souls did not easily return from this worldly comfort to the valley of repentance and tears, nor did they set out for Golgotha to hear the harsh sermon, "Take up your cross and follow me." The heresy of neo-paganism poured sweet poison into hearts, sweeping almost everyone into its currents. It was easy to drift in the shallow waters of the crowd, for there is no more comfortable thing in the world than the creed of the masses. For a time, a person feels light, unburdened. They learn the song of the crows. But lies have their limits, and the cup of hemlock has its bottom. However winged such a desolate life becomes, whoever holds it all in one hand sees that the other hand is empty. It is like a meteor. It flares brightly, cutting the air like lightning, but in the next instant, where it gleamed, you see dark emptiness, an abyss, and night. Alas, man is so insane that he runs after it, even when it falls a second time, 100th time. He lets himself be seized 100 times, believing that this fleeting radiance is meant for him in this world. I saw 100 times that the meteor was a lost cause for me, and 100 times I looked for it. That kept me rooted to the spot, and I could not tear myself away. That was my punishment, to see man fall, to live with him, to be unable to help him, to conquer nothing in the world, neither earth nor heaven, to show him the way to God. An unclean, mucus-laden heart does not converse with angels. A smudged face does not turn to the azure. I was forced to look at the depressed lives of men. Their hours devoured one another. Their entire span of existence sank into a kind of sleeping delirium, into the indiscriminate and destructive alcoholic nights. I suffered in those terrible nights, watching the morning close in on them. Rising in the morning, my hands were empty, my tongue and heart empty. No one addressed me. The day began without a greeting. In such mornings I remembered Slovakia. Somewhere there my prayer stool stood empty, and where I should have knelt for prayer, dust had settled. Who is praying in my place? Probably no one. Listless, dry, emaciated like a splinter, I wandered from corner to corner, from day to day. I thank God that he did not prolong the number of those days. Ulm and Bologna, you were merely a stopover for the exile. Providence showed me a country where, once upon a time, the gospel, bought by the blood of the chosen, began its struggle for existence. On the ground where Christian Rome was born, I stopped in long, silent awe. The centuries still echo through the city streets, the same streets that carried Nero's victims to execution. The crowds are asleep now. They no longer cheer the poem that glorifies a burning Rome. Yet the bustle has not diminished since the hour of the martyrs. Here is the past of baptism by fire and sword. Here is the ancient, eternally prepared valley of Jehoshaphat, the apocalypse of God's chosen ones. And here I stood as one who had heard a mysterious voice calling. I do not know the exact hour of pain when God struck my cheek and said, "Arise, take up your bed and walk." I came and became one of those who partake in the breaking of bread. But first, I had to travel a stretch of the world, never to miss the upper room, never to be late for the day of suffering. Here, near the Colosseum, near the ruins of the Circus Maximus, in the shadow of the Mamertine prison, and by the Quo Vadis chapel, I saw the judge of the living and the dead descend to earth. He descended toward those who have guarded their posts here for ages and ages, those who salute the one coming in the clouds. They lift their faces and cry, "Come, Lamb of God." Proclaim the glory of this valley where the blood flowed. Death mowed us down for centuries. We stood pure before your altars. We served you, and we died. We fell to the ground, and it remained undefiled, just as you created it. Abel's sacrifice summoned you to the threshold of heaven. Come, Lamb of God, and be blessed in the name of the Lord. It would be worthwhile to count the sea of hands raised in oath from ancient times, and the sea of hands still joining them today, hands that stood as ramparts against the curses of the dragon, ready from the world's beginning for infinite devastation. It would be worthwhile to check this vast throng of those crowned by battle and struggle, to see if every single one stands on the spot where the spark of their faith was struck. It would be necessary to shake hands with all those who have risen from their glorified tombs, all whose sacrifice warned the forces of hell, which futilely raged against the rock supported by the words, "Non prevalebant." And finally one should joyously exclaim, "You are all here, and your faith goes with you into the clearest eternity." The sacred soil of Rome breathed relief into my soul. Oh, the infinity of time and space from which the burning torch was raised to scatter the pain on earth. Oh, the mercy that we are not utterly destroyed by the errors and delusions of passion and blindness. Tell me, merchants, drivers, hawkers, jugglers, clowns, where are you rushing through the streets of Rome? Is it worth exhausting yourself for a grain of dust? Where that dust is sowed, all places have been emptied. Here, other centuries are gathering. Toastmaster, the feast has progressed far. It is time for you to begin your speech. We are going to judgment. The justice of God calls us. Here, the judge will stop, and from here he will sweep aside the harvest of the world with his hand, so that the wheat and the tares may be seen. Here, he will ring the keys to his granary and place a guard of angels on its four corners. Stay, and do not hurry to leave. There is no more time, and nowhere else to go. There is no need to fear or tremble. Justice is a beautiful thing. It places people side by side. The distance between Lazarus and the rich man is no longer far. They look at each other, the Pharisees who stoned the prophets, and the prophets they stoned. Vis-a-vis stand the murderers and the murdered. Since the dawn of the gospel, they clashed here like an axe into a young sapling, and rebounding from each other, they fell onto their poles. Today, the sound of the trumpet has gathered them from across the world. We want to be present. Oh God, you gave the world infinite possibilities to know the message of love, peace, and mercy. Rome exists for generations and millennia, holding high the torch of its Christianity so that it may illuminate all the pagans of the earth. Light, light, cried the nations, and the gospel came to the poor and the savage. Epochs of struggle for faith swept over the world, and humanity contributed the coinage of holiness, the coinage of martyrdom and virginity, so that finally the raised sea of hands might be the testimony of the Lamb in the fading age of the unbound devil. Divine providence led me to the land of the sun. There I stood, frozen, and the eternal prayer of the multitudes flowing here like a sea touched my silenced words. Its waves carried my gaze away. My eyes closed for a long time. The departures and arrivals of all of us, over whom the demon once waged a fierce battle, roared here one last time. Repentance, repentance. The furies of hell will be vanquished here, where one day all of us will tell Christ to his face, Vicisti, Galilee. You have conquered, Galilean. We will say it in this very place where we wept over our own ruin and the ruin of the world. I write these lines, and pain tears at my soul. This is a book of suffering, written over years, a book of misery, sorrow, and bitterness. I stop at every sentence, longing to rest and wipe away the tears that overwhelm me. My soul is filled with agony when I see myself in these sacred places. I am somewhere I should not be, not in the state I should be. I am among my own kind, yet I differ from them. My appearance lacks the composed discipline of a monk. No peace shines from my demeanor, and there is no silence in my eyes. My brothers, the guardians of these holy sites, are obedient and sanctified. Their gazes are fixed on God. When one of them brushes past me, a sense of humility and love radiates from him, a simplicity of mind and a mortification that remains unchanged even amidst admirable spiritual ecstasies or contact with the world. These monks have gone gray. Their faces are pale. Their final years are a preparation for departure. Their death will appear as nothing more than a smile on their face as they fall asleep forever. These meditations accompany me as I walk through the sacred temples of the Eternal City. The initial impression of the great Roman basilicas did not have a soothing effect on me, a ruin harboring a timid soul seeking its harbor. It seemed to me that the vastness of these great churches flowed outward and upward, not inward and down into the depths. My nature craves the half-light, the secluded corners, the undisturbed solitude. My soul seeks enclosure. Today, the touch of human eyes that are inquisitive and thoughtless, oppresses me. It is unbearable for my hurting spirit. Such multitudes stream through these basilicas, shuffling back and forth, not bound to God, but to the antiquities, the monumentality of the works, the history and significance of the places. To discern faces here not worn by hardship, by asceticism, by the search for divine springs. They are masses of sightseers, uninvolved in the love of God and the angels. In those first moments, I desperately wanted to burst into tears. My soul was disappointed. It had not found its native ground. I would have despaired the moment I could not utter the first word of the Our Father. And yet, I fled continuously beneath the roofs of the Roman basilicas. There were days when I ran again and again into the marble churches, feeling that my soul was a tomb, cold and desolate, frozen by its eternal muteness. I wandered again and again into these basilicas until finally, weary and with an inaudible cry, I collapsed one day against a column, like a beggar blown here by gales from so many worlds. I began to plead something, to whisper something, to shout something without sound. The unknown prayer utterly exhausted me. I passed out. When I awoke from that feverish stupor, I felt like a yellow leaf on the ground or a piece of trash thrown here by fate from some unknown road, left to be trampled. By some instinct of self-preservation, I dragged myself across the floor of the house of God and remained utterly hunched against the wall, leaning on the cold stone, striving only to hold myself to the earth. Suffering had warped me. St. John, the beloved of Christ, leans toward the Lord just as his head rested during the Last Supper. How fortunate he was to rest on Christ's breast at that first communion. But that head is also heavy, weighed down. What will become of us? What will become of the Master and the disciples? St. John is exhausted by this question. The events before Christ's death undermined the apostles. Their strength was failing. They sensed what was coming. It would be upon them soon. They slept in a heap in the olive garden. Oculi ermering gravati. A heaviness was upon their eyes. And when Christ asked them 3 times to watch, they did not obey, they did not pray, they went to sleep. It is a lamentable thing to meditate upon, what he could not rely even on the apostles. Even St. John, even the most chosen of the chosen disobeyed you, Jesus Christ. You ask, pray, and watch. Was it no strength to pray? This is how man is depicted in his weakness. Nothing is exaggerated here. Even the evangelist did not attempt to idealize this instance of human misery. It is presented just as it occurred. What do you ask of me, God, when my head drops, my eyes are strained, and I do not whisper a prayer, though I have been commanded to pray? What should I do, Christ, when you have not placed your breast beneath my drooping head, and I hear yourself weeping in Gethsemane because the difficult hour of trial approaches? Could you, O Savior, be less forbearing with me, who did not sup so sacredly and devoutly as the beloved John, his head on your breast? Am I more guilty for not having the apostles' purity,
for lacking the sanctity of the disciple who did not have so much sin in his blood as I, and who cannot rouse himself from sleep. You see, Lord, my utter nakedness, undistorted, unidealized. And yet I have not given up on your love, the love with which you pitied the apostles when they scattered from you on Calvary. I ran from you and I fell. As I fell, so I lie before your face. As I slept, so you see me. Where I fell, there I lie, and there I wait for you. I fled from you, like the apostles that night, but I did not have to run far. I was soon exhausted. I fell. I lie here. This, Lord, is your weak, sinful man, both in the role of an apostle and in the role of a priest. St. John leaned his head on Christ's breast. It fell there in innocence. Purity drew it to the holiest chest. Ah, I sighed mournfully. That is another realm of life, high worlds where the eagle soared, seeking the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Therefore, he was allowed to put his ear there. He could listen with such a fallen head. My head fell onto the altar as I offered Mass here. When bowed before the gospel, I uttered Munda cor meum, cleanse my heart. With tears in my eyes, I experienced the moment of that prayer before the relics of the saints, as only the greatest sinner can experience it. Oh, my heavy head, cast onto the altar not by a halo, but by the darkness of sin, pressed against the sacred linen by the weight of vice and all uncleanness, begging for holy purification. Even the most innocent soul would have wept with me then. I could have perished from the pain. How many sins must have remained on that spot after I lifted my head from the altar, having received great forgiveness? They asked me why I was so stooped during Holy Mass. Because the burden of sins, I am a sinner. God saw how I suffered, and above my head he extended his hands crowned with thorns. Behold, repentance is not the act of 1 minute, nor a day, nor a year. Therefore, extend the crown of thorns, Christ, above the sinner's head. Perhaps just as in Gethsemane, when an angel extended a hand with the chalice, the symbol of suffering, before you and St. John slept. I do not know the chalice of solace. I do not know where my head would fall. Therefore, Lord, stand here. Hold the hands twisted with thorns, deficit spiritus meus. My spirit is not like yours, which you attested was willing. St. John, the eagle and the youth, oppressed and charmed me. His likeness from the island of Patmos, as I see him, the poet seer above the monsters and the chosen heavenly beings, disturbed and tormented me. This man perhaps never wept in his exile. Did he have no reason to? He is so much like me. He disobeyed Christ, just as I did when asked to pray and watch. Why did he not have to know the bitterness of penitence as I do? Or are my eyes seeing him wrongly? In what form was he a disciple, heavenly or human? I observe him even in his apocalyptic rapture, and I have the impression that the battle he was allowed to see until the end of the world did not hurt him. He did not pass through its fire, and when in his poetry he gave place to the fallen gods, perhaps even to the Satan of our times, he accused no one, nor did he blaspheme. He did not wish to waste time on it. Was he a man without pain? Was it enough that he was a youth to master his mystical state, to keep his foot from touching the mud of the earth? Did no gale, no lightning bolts cleave his soul, which was open to the great silence, and was it enough that it was holy? Veni, Domi Jesu, he concluded his apocalypse. How close was the distance from his purity to God, from his word to the word? He touched heaven with his holy forehead and prayed, "Come, Lord Jesus." This could have been the cry of angels in heaven while Jesus was 33 years on earth. This could be the impatient longing of the saints from 2,000 years ago until today. Behold, the eyes of St. John saw everything that would come with Jesus, and on his lips, on his heart, burned only the plea, "Come, Lord Jesus." St. John could pray in exile, and this privilege endowed him with the ability to see silence, peace, and God's grace. What will become of us who have not yet managed to transition from the paganism of boredom to the religion of the saints, to pray more deeply with the soul than by leaps across heaven and earth? Lord God, I truly want it much. Was that a prayer? Assuredly, I must return from the cosmos to the altar. For our souls are unappeased. Neither people nor the cosmos can appease them. We are unhappier because of everything.
unhappier if we achieve nothing, and unhappier even when we do achieve it and ask, is that all it's worth? Once, I wanted to please, say, the cosmos, to take it in my hand, to breathe upon it, to shape its form, to embrace it, to possess it. What folly! The ground beneath it was beautiful and fragrant with flowers. What human weakness that I knew nothing of the flowers in the church and only just dreamt of the cosmos of Jesus. In the Basilica of St. John Lateran, I confess with the realization that I finally understood Christ clearly in his statement, the sick need a doctor, not the healthy. Now, however much I am a rebel, however much I am the son of a pagan nature, I restrained myself. I overcame my urge to look out over the globe, just so I could kneel for a moment beside the soul of St. John. I wanted to believe that, strengthened by him, I could become a different pilgrim as I walked out of that church. Indeed, I wanted to believe that I would not grow sad when someone from heaven touched my soul, so ravaged and sliced by worldliness. I would have thanked St. John with a smile for that, but a sorrowful smile, because I lived in entirely different ages and far, far away from Patmos. Every time I crossed the threshold of St. Peter's Basilica, I froze in fear. Like Moses before the burning bush, my heavy feet were stuck by the door. I stood before the majesty of a fiery torch, from which God has spoken for 2,000 years. The divine sacrifice burns upon the shoulders of the confessors, a sacrifice prepared for the glory of the Lamb. It is offered in the human hands at the altars, and offered to Christians in the arenas, the forums, the prisons, and to the monks in their silent cells. This first church of the world concentrates the eyes of all who kneel and pray here and everywhere on the globe when the holy host is lifted to heaven. For the power of the keys is given to St. Peter, the power to open and close heaven when the pilgrims of the earth arrive. This sacred Vatican place, by the inheritance of those keys, preserves and saves humanity on the shifting surface of life and upon the raging sea. It is a harbor for all. Everyone knows that heaven can be opened to them. Behold, the multitude of the faithful wrestles with the angel like Jacob for its blessing, and the day has drawn to a close, and the crowds depart, marked with the sign of the Holy Cross. Here, in the shadow of the decree, fugite parties adversi flee, adversaries, I was caught by the song of the glorified, a song that sounded from the places of torture, which were the gate to eternity. Here they await the resurrection. Who can count them? Where and how many are the martyrs, the blessed victims of death, for whom God has endured the sight of the world's sins even until today? What, then, are we worthy of? What do we deserve, we who cannot offer lesser sacrifices, not sacrifices of blood? I think of children like St. Tarcisius and St. Agnes. These undeveloped youngsters, barely distinguishable from angels, behold what they achieve for you, you degenerate, worn out by sins. How could they have known that after their sacrifices and sufferings, the rule of iniquity would come, with an infinite number of confessors of the darkness? And so they loved God, and thinking of us, they made a confession of blood, to implore God even for the future ages, with whom the malice of man would grow even up to the face of God. They remain here to be witnesses to the sacrifice, if we are capable of any, and their blood is dry on our fingers when we fold them in prayer. God wants to be patient, not only with repentance, but also when the transgressors gather and the earth spews them out like lava. Behold, even small children implored the merciful God not to sweep us, unworthy of the martyr's blood, into damnation. You tremble, sinner. You burn with shame, and terror presses you to the ground, holding back your step, preventing you from moving. Your life flashes by you like a terrible vision, and you wait for someone to lift the horrifying dream from your eyes, as if from a creature under a spell. A step further, and again, you cannot move. You feel the challenge of God's sacrifice before you. Stop! The place is holy. I wail within my soul, frayed by almost endless despair. Tears fell. I sobbed bitterly and whispered, "How dare I approach the saints?" Monks passed by me then, carrying the silence of their cells. My dear religious brother, I wanted to cry out painfully to one of them, "Give me your hand, for God's mercy. Kneel and pray for me." I would have thrown myself at his feet, embraced his ankles, kissed his sandals. His face was so peaceful. He was like a burning candle, which surely I, the sinner, had lit for the reconciliation of God. I stood timidly at the doors of that church. The first prince of the apostles, St. Peter, reminded me of the man any one of us can be. His spiritual weakness, but also his greatness, shines into human misery where man constantly falls and constantly rises. St. Peter, once he swears allegiance, once he draws a sword in the garden, once he throws himself into the sea after his Lord. But immediately afterward, in an unguarded moment, he breaks his oath, denies his promises, betrays Christ, and then weeps again, exiting the high priest's courtyard. Then he confesses his love for the Lord 3 times, flees Rome, is turned back, and is finally executed, dying head down on the cross. This film of the life fate of the Prince of the Apostles stripped the despair from my eyes. I could pray. With sorrow I remained at the doors, and on my knees I knelt for long hours, pouring out my love for God, which I drank like a flower drinks dew. I prayed for Slovakia, for all those to whom I could extend a hand only across those azure skies. From the sacred twilight the ages peered out. Public penitents embraced him, and God was not in a hurry with the verdict of his judgment. Beyond the walls of the city they murdered the apostle of grace, and here a basilica was raised to him. A pilgrim, battered by the winds and dust of distant roads, walks in, kneels on the pavement, prays, and begins to see into the vast chambers of the saint's soul. This saint stole fire from God and raced across the world with the baton of the New Testament. In truth, his beginning was different. An informer, a denouncer, one of the soldier gang of persecutors, a torturer of Christians, was set on a different path. God had to call out to him, had to strike him down with a blaze from heaven, blinding and silencing him on the final path of his bloodthirstiness. The 2 green marble altars in the basilica should speak, that St. Paul, Saul, on the green meadow road to Damascus, erected an altar to God, for which he waged war until death. A column from Solomon's temple stands here, just as St. Paul stood among the nations to whom he brought Christ. He stood fearlessly before pagans and Jews, before their living and dead gods, on the mainland, on the islands, and at the bottom of the sea. He hacked his way through temples and before the learned, before the doubters and the scandalized. He knew the ingratitude of his brothers, the beating of his enemy. They clubbed him. He was stoned, and he was never rid of saboteurs until his death. He earned his living, like any immigrant, by weaving baskets. He travels, suffers, writes to the churches, and, hauled before the courts, he wrestles with the power of the world, carrying his faith from prisons into the streets and the hovels, into the souls of nobles and the hearts of slaves. His days catch up to him in self-denial, in the cross, in the temptation of the devil, and in ecstasies. He speaks of the 3rd heaven and the thorn in his flesh, and above all, he emphasizes me vivere Christus est, for me to live is Christ. The mosaic of the vessel of election runs before my eyes, the life of the apostle, composed of the most varied shades of world travel, struggle, and suffering. How close these saints are to us. They leave their homes, their fathers, mothers, and possessions. They run into the world to preach truths, to fight for ideals, clashing even with the native Pharisees, and they know how to face the errors and delusions of the world. Therefore, they are disliked, unwelcome, persecuted, beaten, and killed. Therefore, they are unfed, hungry, barefoot, and cold. Which country is their homeland? Whose protection do they enjoy? What do they receive for their work in the world? Only the solace that they have not betrayed their mission, and they will not betray it. Behold, that was a mission not of 3 or 4 years, but for life. It was impossible for the apostle to compromise the gospel. Therefore his paths were difficult, unpromising. He had to wrestle with the darkness of the great world. When Christ called him, he might have thought he would joyfully rush toward the glory of God. What? It will not be so easy. Christ signaled to Ananias in Damascus, for I will show him how much he must suffer my name. And now the struggle began, the fight for light, the fight for God's love. Then came the obstacles, the indignities, the hatred, the pursuit against him, the endless hardship, the persecutions, the prisons, and finally a bloody death. But even before his end he confessed, I have fought the good fight. That is St. Paul. I am here. I am someone whom terrible ocean surges have tossed and cast out. so that I might remind people of nothing more than some refuse spewed from the sea coast onto the sand of the shore, left to its own fate and the gnawing of time and tide. I stand here, dried out like a splinter, trembling in body and strained in soul, hunted, pained, perishing from so much vagrancy, lacerated by calamities and falls, corroded by restlessness, scourged by departures and flights, tormented by the loss of home and freedom. Ah, God, and it is still not enough. It is not yet the end. My throat is constricted by such grief that I cannot manage a single word of prayer. Great is my misery from which I want to cry out to the Lord God. My lot would be just. If, collapsed here in the dust by the doors, I could stretch out my hands to those entering the church and beg them to remember me inside. What else can help me? The prayers of the throngs, a whole crusade fighting for the salvation of my soul. I am not ashamed of wanting to do penance. Here I am, world, before your face, so you may see me on my knees, just as you saw me debauched, self-willed, and sinful. Then I could not conceal my sins, nor the scandal they caused. Why should I conceal my repentance now? Finally, I am before the face of God, who is the Father not only of the righteous, but also of prodigal sons. I believe in the forgiveness of sins. I believe that the mountains of God's love are greater than my shadows, however terrifying they may be. But you who read these lines, weep humbly with me, lest together we be judged by the generations of saints who led the guilty and the innocent to God without causing scandal. St. Paul reminds me of the past and the stubbornness of the sinner, and he reminds me of the conversion on the road to Damascus. That captures man in his weakness, and man who obediently and blindly follows the call of God.
Warrior of faith, we will meet again.
In the sacred silence, as I feel it pressed into the pavement of this basilica, my step softens, my daily path here for my few Hail Marys. Centuries and ages whisper through the colonnades, enveloping me in the steps of pilgrims who laid their heads upon the stone of grace, where the eyes of the great intercessor stream through the light of heaven. At these columns our apostles, Saint Cyril and Methodius, stopped and read their silent sacrifices when they first carried the fragrance of the Slovak mountains to the eternal city. Here, perhaps, the Slovak cult of the Seven Sorrows first flared from their lips to carry me and my nation into the distant millennia. Touched by its light, we must see our painful lives beyond our own individual sorrows. What good is our suffering if it lacks Christian consecration? What good is our lamentation if the meaning of the weeping does not compel us to the place where tears are wiped away? Finally, whether pain or tears, even if it comprises a single long human life, or the life of entire generations, they will be stopped like rivers when they reach the sea.
A sea of grace surrounds you, O Mary.
Throughout the pilgrimage of my life, I lacked the image of a mother. How could I not find her here? The vision of a mother remained with me, the vision of a parent's love I had carried since birth. I pursue this vision into these ages of pain, following her voice that rises and swells from my heart. I ask her only, patiently I ask her, for love. The mother I never had will become the mother I will find. Let my loving be, like my death, as holy as her son's command, Mother, behold your son. She heard only voices of despair from me. But I possess no greater strength than my despair, and I have no more certainty than that I am permitted to be touched by her gaze, just as 7 swords once touched her. Now my heart ached terribly. Does love truly exist? Mother of God, I beg you by the wounds of Christ, beneath which you also bled, have mercy on me. I am like a flimsy shred, like dust that clung here. I have no one in the world. Storms and whirlwinds have always caught up to me, and now I am within your reach. O Mother, do not pass by my silent bleeding as you journey through the world. I am a helpless wreck. Would you permit yet more storms to assail this poor ruin? Mother, I have come from far away. Lift me from the ground.
I began to speak. My face was wet with tears. I told her that I never had a mother.
Why was I punished so? Mother, mother, I cried this one word, which I had never uttered since birth. Mother, behold, I have been without comfort since childhood. I never knew, and I do not know today,
what motherly love is. I have no one to go to. Remember, Mother, that I am forsaken, and I will not leave you now. I knelt there for long hours. I would have perished from grief had I not clung to the certainty that if never in my life, now my call was breaking through to heaven. Remember, O Mary, I pray with the words of St. Bernard that it has never been known that anyone who implored your intercession was left forsaken. Heavenly Mother, dearest Mother, help me. You are my final salvation. I writhed there in the dust of the ground, conquering this one heart with silent, sorrowful rosaries. Comfort of the afflicted, they sang in the choir during the litany one evening as I crouched in the corner of the church where I came for my daily rest. Comfort of the afflicted. The words of this confession soared above the crowd of faithful, and I felt how powerfully they pierced the basilica's walls, rippling and spreading into the world. In that instant, the entire earth and all creation repeated and took this cry into its mouth again, waiting intently for your answer, O Mother of all. Then I knew who you were, Mother. Then I was convinced that in the pain the world writhes in today, this one single cry could save humanity. And even if the entire world stopped praying with only this one cry left, Mother, you would have to answer its last prayer. And I remembered Slovakia. Do not my people pray with these same words? My soul howled terribly in those hours. Masiri, I pronounced this holy name syllable by syllable, when my weeping prevented me from uttering the full name. So many Slovak generations have wept at your feet. So many painful centuries of ours have laid their cup of sorrow in your hands. Would you not allow us to redeem ourselves through our tears? Now we are afraid to step away from you. We have lived to see an age of unheard of profanation and oppression. We will perish. Heavenly Mother, save us. Santa Maria Maggiore, that was my holy asylum. Mary, Mother of God, I found you. You stood here. I saw you above the clouds that could no longer hide you.